I woke up to a sound that shouldn't have been there, a low-frequency growl that felt like it was vibrating the very marrow of my bones. And for a second I was back in the high desert of Kandahar, waiting for the dust to settle after mortar strike. But then the rattling of the window panes snapped me back to the present, to my quiet 2-acre slice of heaven outside of Nashville. I rolled out of bed, pulled on a faded 82nd Airborne tee, and stepped out on a porch just in time to see 3 massive diesel construction trucks, the kind that looked like they could chew through a mountain, barreling down my private gravel path, leaving deep, ugly gouges in the earth I'd spent 15 years tending. They didn't in Oppos. Stop at the property line. No, they just kept rolling, tires as big as my torso crushing the hand-laid border stones I'd scavenged from the creek back when my wife, Sarah, was still here to help me carry them. I marched down those steps with my heart hammering against my ribs, waving my arms like a madman, but the guy in the lead truck just gave me this dismissive little flick of the wrist like I was a stray dog in his way, before he hopped out with a clipboard tucked under his arm. I asked him what the hell he thought he was doing on my land, and he just adjusted his mirrored shades, looked at his papers, and told me they were there for the end quote, utility expansion end quote, authorized by the Briarwood Homeowners Association. Now, you have to understand, my house sits on the very fringe of the Briarwood development. Sarah and I bought this lot before the subdivision even existed, back when it was just old forest and quiet air, and while we were technically in quote, annexed in quote, into their reach years ago, my deed was supposed to be untouchable. I told him this was private acreage, not a community sandbox, but he just pointed to a backhoe that was already beginning to swing its heavy metal arm toward my greenhouse. The greenhouse where Sarah's heirloom tomatoes were still blooming, a place that was more a sanctuary than a building. And he said, end quote, take it up with the board, buddy, we've got a work order, end quote. My blood wasn't into Oppos. Tea just boiling, it was turning into steam, so I went back inside, my hands shaking so hard I could barely flip through the directory to find the number for Evelyn Vance. The HOA president, everyone called in quote. The Duchess in quote, because she ran the neighborhood like a feudal kingdom. When she picked up, her voice was that sickly sweet, polished silver tone that make your skin crawl, and before I could even get a full sentence out about the trespassing, she cut me off with a little laugh that sounded like glass breaking. End quote. Oh, Arthur, end quote. She said like she was talking to a confused toddler, end quote. That strip of land was reclassified as a high-density utility easement in the last quarterly meeting. It's all for the greater good of the community, and honestly, that old garden of yours was becoming a bit of an eyesore. Dawn and Oppos. Do you think? End quote. I told her I never got a notice, never saw a vote. And she just hummed and said the notices were posted in the clubhouse. The clubhouse that's locked behind a key code 90% of the time. And then she hung up, leaving me standing in the silence of my kitchen while the sound of shattering glass drifted in from the yard as the backhoe finally found its mark. I stood there for a long time, staring at the wall where I keep my old unit photos, feeling that cold, surgical clarity that used to settle in during the worst of it overseas, and I realized that Evelyn Vance didn't end Oppos. She just on a utility line. She wanted to see if I'd break. She knew I was a widower, knew I kept to myself, and she figured I was just an old man who'd grumble and then fade away into the background while she paved over my memories. But Evelyn made one catastrophic mistake. She forgot that I spent 22 years as a combat engineer, a man whose entire career was built on the science of boundaries, structures, and how to hold a position when the world is trying to move you. The next morning, I didn't in Oppos go out and scream at the workers again, because screaming is for people who don in Oppos. Have a plan. Instead, I drove down to the county recorder in Oppos' office with a thermos of black coffee and my original yellow deed from 2005. I spent 4 hours with a clerk named Martha, who looked like she'd seen it all, and when we finally pulled up the master GIS overlay, her eyebrows shot up so high they almost hit her hairline. End quote. Mr. Thorne, end quote. She whispered, end quote. Their ISN and Oppos. An easement on this property. Not a city one, not a county one, and certainly not an HOA one. It looks like your board president tried to file A and Oppos, proposed in Oppos, map as A and Oppos, finalized in Oppos. 1. Hoping no one would check the seal, end quote. I felt a grin spread across my face that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with tactical advantage. So I thanked her, got a certified, stamped copy of my boundaries, and headed to the hardware store where I spent $6,000 on industrial steel mesh, solar-powered stadium lights, and 4 pallets of quick-set high-density grout. When I got back, the construction crew had already dug a 10-foot wide trench through my lavender beds, and Evelyn was standing there in her designer gardening boots, which had never seen a speck of real dirt, pointing at the ruins of my greenhouse and talking to a surveyor. I walked right up to her, not fast, not aggressive, just steady, and I handed her the certified map from the county, and for a split second I saw the mask slip. I saw her eyes dart across the page, realizing she'd been caught in a blatant land grab, but then she straightened her back and hissed that her, in quote, legal team, in quote, would find a way to make the easement stick regardless. I didn't oppose. T argue I didn't oppose. To even tell her to leave. I just looked her in the eye and said, in quote, Evelyn, you spent a lot of time telling me what I can and oppose. T do on my land. So I think in oppose. This time I show you what I can do, in quote. And then I turned my back on her and started unloading the steel. I didn't oppose. T sleep that night. Not for a second. And the neighbors probably thought I'd finally snapped because I had the floodlights on and a welder humming until the sun started to peek over the oaks. I wasn't oppose. T just building a fence. I was building a statement, a 300-foot-long reinforced, in quote, memorial wall, in quote, made of recycled steel panels and heavy-duty H-beams, positioned precisely 1 inch inside my legal property line, effectively cutting off the HOA's, in quote, utility path, in quote, and trapping their backhoe on the wrong side of the trench. But the real kicker, the thing that I knew would make Evelyn's head explode, was the centerpiece, a 12-foot-high steel pylon topped with a massive, vintage brass lighthouse lantern I'd salvaged years ago, and right below it, a bronze plaque dedicated to the 82nd Airborne, which legally classified the entire structure as a, in quote, private veterans memorial, end quote. Under our state's specific property codes, once a structure is designated and dedicated as a memorial, it's a nightmare to touch, without a court order that could take years to get. By 7 a.m., the construction crew returned, but they stopped dead at the edge of the gravel. Where there had been a muddy trench the day before, there was now a shimmering, silver and black steel barricade that looked like it belonged on a border crossing. The lead worker tried to yell something about his equipment being trapped on my side, but I just pointed to a new sign I'd bolted to the pylon. And quote, private property, no trespassing, impounded equipment awaiting legal mediation. End quote. 10 minutes later, Evelyn Vance's black SUV shrieked to a halt, and she climbed out looking like she hadn't slept much either, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury as she stared at the wall. End quote. You can oppose. To do this. End quote. She screamed, her voice cracking in the morning air, end quote. This is a violation of the architectural harmony of Briarwood. I'll have a bulldozer here by noon to tear this junk down, end quote. I just leaned against the steel, took a slow sip of coffee, and reminded her that she'd have to explain to the local news, who I'd already emailed a copy of my deed and the, end quote, proposed, end quote, map she'd faked, why she was planning to use HOA funds to destroy a veterans memorial on land she didn't oppose, to even own. The standoff lasted for 3 days, and it was the best theater I'd seen in years. The HOA tried to send a, end quote, compliance officer, end quote, to serve me a fine, but I met him at the gate with my county certified map and a copy of the state's Memorial Protection Act, and he turned around before he even got his clipboard out. Meanwhile, word got out to the rest of the neighborhood about Evelyn's secret, end quote, logistics center, end quote, plan. It turns out she wasn't in oppose. T just building a utility line. She was trying to create a shortcut for a developer she was secretly invested in, a move that would have sent heavy truck traffic through our quiet cul-de-sac for the next 5 years. The neighbors who used to look away when I walked my dog started showing up at my gate with thermoses of coffee and boxes of donuts. Mr. Henderson from down the block, a guy who usually spends his time obsessing over his lawn height, actually brought over a lawn chair and sat by my wall just to watch Evelyn fume from her car. By the end of the week, the internal pressure on the HOA board became a tidal wave. 2 members resigned when they realized Evelyn had forged their digital signatures on the easement, end quote, approval, end quote, and a special emergency session was called in the park across from my house because the clubhouse couldn't and oppos hold the crowd. I showed up in my old dress blues, not because I wanted to be a hero, but because I wanted them to see the man they'd tried to steamroll, and when I laid out the timeline of Evelyn's deception, the room went so quiet you could hear the wind in the trees. Evelyn tried one last time to scream about, in quote, neighborhood standards, and quote, but she was shouted down by 100 people who were tired of being ruled by a tyrant in a tracksuit. The board was dissolved that night, and a new one was elected on the spot, with their first act being a formal apology to me and a settlement to pay for the restoration of my greenhouse and gardens. Evelyn sold her house within a month, moving away before the fraud investigation could fully heat up, and the street felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off the pavement. I kept the wall, though. I shortened the steel panel so I could see the sunset, but I kept the pylon and the light. Every night, that lighthouse lantern kicks on, casting a warm, steady glow over the new lavender and the heirloom tomatoes I replanted in Sarah's honor. It's a reminder that a home, ISN and oppos, just a plot of dirt or a set of rules. It's the ground you're willing to stand on when someone tells you that you don't and oppos belong. But looking back at that empty lot where Evelyn's house used to be, I can and oppos help, but wonder if I went too far, or if this is just how things have to be now. Does every quiet life eventually require a wall to keep the world out, or did I just replace one kind of tension with another? People say I won, and the settlement check is sitting in my bank account, but sometimes I look at that steel and wonder if I'm still just a soldier guarding a border that doesn't and oppos need to exist. What do you think? Is it possible to find peace without building a fortress, or is the and quote, greater good and quote, always just a lie people tell to take what's yours? Drop a comment and tell me if you would have built the wall, or if I'm just as stubborn as the woman I was fighting.